Hi, I'm Brianna, and I'll be reading from the August House book of scary stories, Spooky Tales for Telling Out Loud. And this is edited by Liz Parkhurst. The Gingerbread Boy, a Kentucky folktale by Mary Hamilton. There once lived a girl who shared a home with her stepmother. Years earlier, her mother had died and her father had remarried. While her father lived, her stepmother treated her kindly, but after the girl's father died, that woman turned poison mean. She made the girl do all the work around the house and on the farm. When the girl didn't work fast enough, and most days there was no fast enough, the woman beat the girl with a chain. The girl was miserable, but she had nowhere else to go. One morning, when the girl was around 14 years old, her stepmother said, "Today you are going to chop the weeds out of the cotton. Go on out there and don't come back to the house until you've finished either." She sent the girl out without any breakfast. The girl trudged out to the shed, picked up a hoe, and walked on down to the cotton patch, where she began chopping weeds. The girl chopped and chopped. The sun beat down on her. Her stomach growled. Still, she chopped. But as she worked, she thought, "I ought to just run away, but where would I go?" The longer she worked, the more running away seemed like a reasonable idea. Finally, she gave in. She hid the hoe in tall weeds under an old wagon. Then she walked into some nearby woods. Now, even though the woods were so close that the girl could hear leaves rustle in the slightest breeze, she had never been there before. Her stepmother kept her working so hard, she'd never even had time to explore the woods right next to the fields. So in no time she was lost, but that didn't stop her. "I'd rather die out here than go back," she thought, and she kept walking. About mid-afternoon, she reached a clearing. In front of her stood an amazing house. The shutters were made of wafer cookies, and gumdrops studded the walls. Oh, the girl was so hungry she couldn't stop herself. She ran up to a window, broke off a bit of shutter, and popped it into her mouth. The door of the house opened, and an old woman looked out. "Child," she said, "you must be awfully hungry if you're chewing up my house." The girl swallowed hastily. "I'm sorry, ma'am," she apologized. "I should never have done that. I am so sorry." "It's all right, child," said the old woman. "You've done no harm that can't be undone. Like I said, you must be awfully hungry." The old woman offered her hand. "Come on inside and let me feed you a proper meal." The girl went inside, and the old woman did indeed feed her a fine meal. The old woman also told the girl stories and jokes. The two of them talked and laughed together. The girl felt a joy she had not known since her mother died. Then the old woman glanced out the window. "Oh, child, it's going to be dark soon," she said. "You need to go on home now." "Oh," sighed the girl, "do I have to go? Couldn't I stay with you?" "No, you need to go home." But the old woman interrupted her. "I know you're living a hard life, but you have to go home." "I was lost when I found your house," the girl protested. "I don't even know how to go home. Please, can't I stay?" The old woman stood. "I'll help you find your way, child." She walked to a cupboard, opened it, reached in, and pulled out a gingerbread boy. She handed the gingerbread boy to the girl, saying, "Put this in your pocket. Eat it after you reach home." The girl put the gingerbread boy in her pocket. She was about to speak again, but the old woman raised her hand and the girl fell silent. "Your life will be better, child," the old woman assured her. "You'll see." The two of them left the old woman's house. In a very short time, the old woman had led the girl through the woods and within sight of the old wagon. They said their goodbyes. Then the girl retrieved her hoe from under the wagon and trudged on home. When she walked into the house, she smelled freshly baked bread. Her stepmother sat at the kitchen table, knife in hand, slicing the loaf. When she saw the girl, she set down the knife. "I don't know where you've been, but we're not chopping out the cotton like I told you." As she spoke, she leaned over and picked up the chain beside her chair. "Don't think you'll be eating any of this bread." When the girl saw the chain, she ran toward her room. Her stepmother came after her, whirling the chain. The girl ducked as she ran into her room. She slammed the door and braced herself against it. She could feel the door shudder as the chain struck it again and again. Finally, the stepmother tired and returned to her chair at the table. The girl braced a chair under the doorknob to keep her stepmother out. Then she collapsed on her bed and cried. She cried for her father and mother. She cried in longing for the joy of that afternoon. She cried and cried. When she was cried out, she rolled over and felt the gingerbread boy in her pocket. She took it out, looked at it, held it by the head, and bit off an arm. Out in the other room, the stepmother sat eating warm bread slathered in butter. Suddenly, her knife flew out of her hand, and whack, it cut off her arm. She couldn't scream. She just stared at her arm on the floor. Back in the bedroom, the girl ate the other arm. Whack! The stepmother's other arm landed on the floor. The girl ate a leg. Whack! One leg gone. The girl ate another leg. Whack! Another leg on the floor. Then the girl broke off the body from the head. Whack! The stepmother's head fell to the floor. After she finished eating the gingerbread boy, the girl fell asleep. The next morning, when the girl walked out of her room, she found her stepmother's body in pieces. No blood on the floor, just pieces. The girl knew just what to do. She took a shovel from the shed and she dug a grave. She had worked so hard for so many years, she had no trouble digging a hole 6 feet deep. Of course, she had no need to make it 6 feet long. After all, the body was in pieces. In the times that followed, the girl lived on there in her own house. She and the old woman in the woods became fast friends and the very best of neighbors. This one is titled Aaron Kelly's Bones, based on Appalachian and African American folklore by Kevin Cordy. Everyone knew Aaron Kelly. Aaron Kelly was as mean as a 3-headed snake, and his poison was even worse. He had a temper, and nothing ignited it more than seeing other men talk to his Miss Alice. He called her his prize. Not a prize like a tiara you parade around in a beauty contest, but a prize like a hidden treasure you keep to yourself. Aaron Kelly tried his best to hide Miss Alice from everyone. He insisted Miss Alice was his. "No one is going to take my prize away from me," he would yell. "I will have the head of any man who tries." Once a man had commented to Miss Alice, "Madam, with that new hat you look as pretty as the sun." The whole town heard Aaron Kelly yell, "I will black out the sun if you ever say such words to my prize again." When Aaron Kelly arrived in town, people moved out of the way. Mothers grabbed their children. Grown men would quickly nod and just as fast run away when they saw him. It was said his eyes could dig deep into your very bones. It seemed as though nothing affected Aaron Kelly. Nothing, that is, except the passage of time. As the years passed, Aaron Kelly was disturbing the townspeople a little less and staying home a little more. Eventually, he took sick and stayed in bed. Passerby could hear him coughing the next town over. Some said he did not have long to live, and in fact, he did not. And during this time, no one saw Miss Alice. People believed she was trapped in their house. In fact, the next time anyone saw her, Miss Alice arrived in town wearing a coal black dress. She marched in old Harris's funeral parlor and whispered, "Aaron Kelly is dead. Someone might want to know, but I doubt it." She then went into the newspaper office and took out an obituary that read, "Aaron Kelly died today after a long sickness." It seemed that everyone in town came to the funeral except the fiddler. Mr. Henry played "Will the Circle Be Unbroken" at every funeral. On this day, the fiddle was silent. Aaron Kelly had more company when he was dead than he ever had alive. Some said they were there more out of curiosity than care. Would the pastor be able to think of a single good thing to say about the man? The only one to wear black was Miss Alice. Old Man Phelps exclaimed, "I can't believe the old man is dead." Others said, I think he died 5 years ago, but his body didn't know it yet. Young Tommy Belso said, I don't know if I could look at his grave. His bones would scare me. Miss Alice did not cry. She paid her respects and left. A year passed, and Miss Alice never visited the grave of Aaron Kelly. She had no reason. It had been a year of quiet. No one had called her stupid or worthless. She only now knew it was safe to smile. No one called her a stubborn mule anymore. Aaron Kelly's bones were in the ground. In the spring, Miss Alice planted a garden with new azalea bushes in the front yard. She liked to sit on the porch and anticipate the arrival of their blooms. She had tried to grow them once before, but Aaron Kelly pulled them out and called, Old woman, they are just weeds, just like you. Then he would sneer, They will die here, and so will you. One day, Miss Alice heard a knock on her door. When she opened it, there stood Mr. Henry, the fiddler, carrying a small sprig of flowers. Good evening, Miss Alice. My, you look lovely in your sun hat. I was wondering, perhaps, if it is not seen as impolite, would you care to join me at the country dance this Saturday? I would be most honored to have you as my guest. Miss Alice looked at Mr. Henry and could not help but notice how kind he was to her. She agreed to dance. Meanwhile, the bones of Aaron Kelly started to itch. At the dance, Miss Alice never stood still. Not only could Mr. Henry fiddle as good as a cat crawls, but when he was not striking at the bow, he could dance. Miss Alice felt safe in his arms. The dance did not end that night. It led to another night, and still another night. They were soon dating and dancing on a regular basis. The bones of Aaron Kelly continued to move. Late one Friday night, the sun had gone to bed and only a sliver of the moon was awake. Miss Alice was home alone when she heard a strange, irregular sound at her door. It sounded less like knocking. It sounded less like a knock. Can you edit that out? Okay. It sounded less like a knock than a scraping. When Miss Alice opened her door, her smile left for good. Standing in front of her was not a living thing at all, but a skeleton. On the skeleton's arms, she saw Aaron Kelly's old broken wristwatch. It was the same one she had told him to fix, but he said, It ain't broke if I can still wear it. She knew then the skeleton was dead old Aaron Kelly making a house call. The skeleton glared at her and said, Woman, I told you I would return if I ever saw you with another man. This is my house, and you are my woman, and here is where I'm going to stay. The skeleton walked to the rocking chair and began to rock, back and forth, back and forth. Look here, Aaron Kelly, you have to leave. You died. It's not right for you to be here. Nonsense. Dead or alive, I'm staying right here, said Aaron Kelly. You have to go now. I'm not budging. Meanwhile, Miss Alice spied Mr. Henry from her big bay window walking down the lane. She had asked him to teach her how to strum a few notes, and he was late arriving. Miss Alice pleaded with the bones to leave. Woman, fix me something to eat. Your food is worse than worms, but I am hungry, Aaron Kelly snarled. Miss Alice fed Aaron Kelly some simmering hot soup, but it spilled out through the bones, washing away to the living room floor. Aaron Kelly, I have fed you. Now it is time for you to go. About this time, Mr. Henry knocked on the door. Miss Alice tried to ignore it, but Aaron Kelly yelled, Open the door, woman. Don't you have any manners? Reluctantly, she opened the door. Mrs. Alice's face was pale. Miss Alice, what is wrong? Mr. Henry inquired. Miss Alice simply pointed to the rocking chair. When he saw what was in the chair, Mr. Henry was speechless. Slowly, he took Miss Alice's hand. Both of them watched as the skeleton rose from the rocking chair. Henry, you and your case need to leave now. Mark my words, you cannot have my woman as long as I remain in this house. You need to stick to fiddling. I intend to stay, so you best be gone, declared Aaron Kelly. She never was your woman, Mr. Henry responded. You treated her like property. You say you love her, but you don't. because you don't know what love is. I love her, and I intend to stay as long as she will have me." Miss Alice stammered out some words. "Aaron, Henry is right. You never brought me flowers, you never noticed my smile, and you never cared for me. I was more like a slave than a wife." "Leave, Aaron Kelly. I do not love you, and I never have." "What good would it have been to bring you flowers?" bemoaned Aaron Kelly. "All they are weeds and fancy dress." The hours whittled by. Miss Alice and Mr. Henry did not know what to do. Each minute ticked away as they watched the bones rock back and forth, back and forth. Finally, Mr. Henry stood up. "Aaron Kelly, you said I should stick to fiddling, and that is just what I'm going to do." He turned to Miss Alice and whispered, "Since we missed the dance tonight, I will bring the dance to you." With that, Mr. Henry opened his case, took out his fiddle, and began to play. "Miss Alice, sometimes you have to go on and leave the hard times by," he declared. "Let us have some fun." He then struck up "Turkey in the Straw." No one could play like Mr. Henry. Just hearing his music made your toes tap. Even the bones of Aaron Kelly began to jiggle. Next, he tuned up "The Mountain Whirlpool." He played stronger and stronger. Not only did Aaron's toe bones begin to tap, his whole skeleton began to twist, turn, and sway to the music. Aaron Kelly began to dance, and Mr. Henry played faster. Soon, a thigh bone flew from the skeleton and hit the fireplace. As the music got louder and stronger, his elbow bone hit the ceiling. "Play harder, Mr. Henry, play harder," yelled Miss Alice. Bones flew everywhere. The leg bone hit the cat box, and the kitty slunk screaming into the kitchen. A finger bone sailed into the living room. A toe bone hit Grandpa's portrait. Some bones flew by the cabinet, some under the rocker, some outside. Bones were everywhere. Mr. Henry played on and on. Miss Alice began to scoop up the bones one by one and stash them into an old flour sack. She and Mr. Henry hurried to the graveyard, where they spent the rest of the night burying the bones in 4 different plots. She saved one bone in the sack. The night air was quiet. 6 months later, Miss Alice and Mr. Henry married. On their wedding night, they placed the small bone Miss Alice had saved above their fireplace. They hardly ever raised their voices with each other, but on the few occasions when they did, they stopped when one or the other of them would notice the bone above the fireplace. Meanwhile, in that graveyard, it is said the bones still move. But it's a fool's tale, because once something is dead, he or she is dead. Ain't that right? Okay. Oh, you're back. Well, now I'll be reading The Red Satin Ribbon, an American variant of a European legend by Martha Hamilton and Mitch Weiss. Sam and Sue lived next door to each other from the time they were born. Every day they played together. Sam loved Sue, and Sue loved Sam. Sam thought Sue was the sweetest, smartest, and most gorgeous girl he'd ever met. She wore such bright, colorful clothes, and every day she wore a red satin ribbon around her neck. Sue thought that Sam was the nicest, most considerate, and most handsome boy in the world. Sam loved Sue, and Sue loved Sam. They went to kindergarten and then first grade together, and every day Sue wore that red ribbon around her neck. Sam began to wonder why Sue always wore that ribbon. One day he just had to ask, "Susie, why do you always wear that red ribbon around your neck?" "Oh, I'll tell you later, Sammy," said Sue shyly. The years passed by, and still Sam loved Sue, and Sue loved Sam. They went steady all through high school, and every day Sue wore the red ribbon around her neck. Sam continued to ask her about it, but she'd just say, "I'll tell you later." It was the only secret that Sue kept from Sam, but still Sam loved Sue, and Sue loved Sam. At last, it was the night of the senior prom. Naturally, Sue and Sam were together. Sue wore a beautiful red satin gown to match the red ribbon around her neck. Sue, why do you always wear that red ribbon? Sam begged. Why do you always ask me that? Snapped Sue. It's none of your business. If I feel like it, maybe I'll tell you later. The years passed by, and although they argued now and then, still Sam loved Sue, and Sue loved Sam. Eventually, they became engaged. On their wedding day, Sam pleaded, Sue, why do you always wear that red ribbon around your neck? Can't you take it off just this once? Sammy, darling, said Sue, firmly yet lovingly, I'll take this ribbon off when I'm good and ready. Now please, let's not argue on our wedding day. The years passed by, and still Sam loved Sue, and Sue loved Sam. They had 2 children and several grandchildren. Every day, Sue wore that satin ribbon around her neck. Sam continued to ask her about it, but each time she'd say, I'll tell you later. At last, it was their 50th wedding anniversary. Sam was sure that Sue would finally tell him her secret after their many years together. Sue, won't you tell me your secret? Said Sam. Why do you always wear that red satin ribbon around your neck? Sammy, don't you ever get tired of asking me that? Replied Sue. If I've told you once, I've told you 1,000 times. I'll tell you later. The years passed by, and still Sam loved Sue, and Sue loved Sam. But then Sue grew ill, and finally she was on her deathbed. Sam knew they had had a wonderful life together, but still he was heartbroken, and there was one thing he had to know before she died. Kneeling by her bed, tears streaming down his cheeks, he pleaded with her one last time. Susie, we've known each other for more than 80 years, and every day you've worn that red ribbon tied around your neck. Won't you please tell me why you wear it? Well, Sam, you've been so patient all these years, said Sue, her voice shaking. If you must know, I'll show you. With her last bit of strength, Sue took hold of one end of the red satin ribbon and began to untie it, and as she did, her head fell off.